Welcome to this journey through one of the most disturbing cases recorded in the history of Savannah, Georgia. Before we begin, I invite you to leave in the comments where you're watching from and the exact time you're listening to this narration. We're interested in knowing which places and what times of day or night these documented stories reach. The earliest records of Mary Ann Dupree begin with a single line in the property ledger of the Whitmore estate, dated April 1842. Female, age 23, purchased from Charleston Market, $800. What the ledger failed to mention was that Mary Ann arrived at the Georgian plantation already with child, a fact that would have significantly reduced her market value had it been disclosed by the seller. The Whitmore estate stood on the outskirts of Savannah, Georgia, a sprawling property of 12 acres, with a main house that rose 3 stories high, its white columns gleaming against the backdrop of ancient oak trees draped in Spanish moss. The property had been in the Whitmore family since 1771, passed down through generations of wealthy cotton merchants. By 1842, the estate was under the control of Thomas Whitmore and his wife, Eliza, a couple whose public reputation for Christian charity contrasted sharply with what transpired behind their property walls. According to tax records from that year, the Whitmores owned 37 enslaved people. Most worked the cotton fields that stretched behind the main house, but Mary Ann was purchased specifically for household duties. The primary household record, kept by Mrs. Eliza Whitmore herself, notes that Mary Ann was to serve as nursemaid to the Whitmores' 4 children, Josephine, age 7, twins Robert and Richard, age 5, and infant Beatrice, just 3 months old. What makes this case particularly disturbing is not merely the institution of slavery itself, as morally reprehensible as it was, but rather what parish records and private journals would later reveal about the specific conditions Mary Ann endured during her 17 years at the Whitmore estate. It was Dr. Samuel Blackwood, the Whitmore family physician, whose meticulous notes first raised questions that would linger in Savannah's historical shadow for generations. In a medical journal discovered during the renovation of his former office in 1963, Blackwood documented his visits to the estate between 1842 and 1859. His notes contain an unsettling pattern. "Called to examine the Whitmore's nursemaid today," reads an entry from December 1842. "Patient appears severely malnourished despite advanced pregnancy. Advised increased rations to ensure delivery of healthy infant. Mr. Whitmore dismissed concerns, stating only that field hands eat when they work, house slaves eat when they behave." 3 weeks later, Blackwood records, "Delivered female infant to house slave Mary Ann. Child appears healthy despite mother's poor condition. Mrs. Whitmore has decided child is to be sent to the Jenkins property once weaned. Mother not informed." This was the first documented separation of Mary Ann from her biological child. According to cross-referenced records from the Jenkins Plantation, located 20 miles west of Savannah, a female infant named simply Dupree was indeed added to their property inventory in April 1843. The Whitmore household ledger, kept in Eliza Whitmore's precise handwriting, makes no mention of Mary Ann's pregnancy or the birth. The only notation is a brief line in the expenses column: medical services, $2.50. Mary Ann's primary duty remained the care of the Whitmore children. Household records indicate she slept on a pallet in the nursery, available at all hours for the Whitmore infant, while simultaneously being responsible for the other children during waking hours. Local newspapers from that period frequently featured advertisements from the Whitmores seeking additional house staff, yet parish records indicate the positions remained unfilled for unusually long periods. A curious document emerged in 1967 during a Historical Society cataloguing project, a letter from a former applicant for the position of Whitmore housekeeper to her sister in Charleston. The letter, dated September 1843, states, "I removed myself from consideration upon witnessing Mrs. Whitmore strike their nurse in front of the children for allowing the baby to cry. The woman's silent acceptance of such treatment was more disturbing than the act itself. I shall seek employment elsewhere." Throughout 1844, Dr. Blackwood's visits to the estate increased in frequency. His notes reference treating the Whitmore children for common childhood ailments, measles, throat inflammation, minor injuries. In each case, he notes Mary Ann's constant presence and attentive care, often remarking on her apparent exhaustion. Then, in February 1845, comes another troubling entry. House slave Mary Ann again with child, approximately 5 months along by my estimation. Mrs. Whitmore expresses great inconvenience at the timing. The Savannah birth records contain no official documentation of this pregnancy's outcome. However, Dr. Blackwood's journal notes simply, "Male infant delivered to Whitmore house slave during night. By morning, no evidence of child remained on property. No further inquiries permitted. County auction records from May 1845 list a male infant, unnamed, sold to Carter shipping merchant. The Carter family operated a shipping business with roots to the Caribbean. No further trace of this child appears in any accessible records. The pattern continued. Between 1845 and 1853, Dr. Blackwood's records indicate Mary Ann delivered 4 more children. In each case, the infants disappeared from the Whitmore property within weeks of birth. 2 were documented in sales records to plantations in neighboring counties. 1 appears in a ship's manifest bound for New Orleans. The 4th vanishes from all official documentation. What makes this case particularly haunting is the parallel documentation of Mary Ann's continued care for the Whitmore children. Parish records show she accompanied the family to Sunday services, standing at the back of the church with the Whitmore infant, while the rest of the family sat in their front row pew. School records note her as the person who delivered and collected the Whitmore children daily. A daguerreotype from 1848, discovered in the Savannah Historical Society archives, shows the Whitmore family posed formally in their Sunday best, with Mary Ann standing rigidly behind them, holding the youngest child. The question that haunted later researchers was clear. How did a woman, repeatedly separated from her own children, continue to provide care for the children of those responsible for that separation? A partial answer emerges in a series of letters exchanged between Eliza Whitmore and her sister in Boston, recovered during the estate sale following the last Whitmore descendant's death in 1958. In one letter dated July 1849, Eliza writes, "The children's nurse continues to be troublesome with her melancholy moods. Thomas has forbidden her to speak of her former children, on pain of being sold to the sugar plantations downriver. This threat proves most effective in maintaining her cooperation and attention to our children's needs. The sugar plantations of Louisiana were known to have among the highest mortality rates for enslaved workers, due to the brutal labor conditions and tropical diseases. Being sold downriver was considered among the most severe threats that could be made." It was in 1850 that the most disturbing chapter of this story begins to unfold, according to church baptismal records. On March 10th, Eliza Whitmore gave birth to twin girls, Charlotte and Catherine. The delivery was difficult, and Dr. Blackwood's notes indicate Eliza suffered severe complications that left her bedridden for weeks and permanently unable to bear more children. 2 weeks later, his medical journal contains this entry: "Called to examine house slave Mary Ann, who is again with child. Mrs. Whitmore, still confined to bed, became extremely agitated upon this news. Mr. Whitmore dismissed me before examination was complete. The next entry regarding the Whitmore household comes 3 months later. Summoned urgently to the Whitmore estate, found Mrs. Whitmore in state of extreme distress. House slave Mary Ann appears to have been subjected to primitive and dangerous procedure to terminate pregnancy. Infection severe. Doubt she will survive the night. But survive she did, though Dr. Blackwood's subsequent notes indicate she was severely weakened for months afterward. During this same period, his records show the Whitmore twins thriving under Mary Ann's care, despite her own precarious health. By 1851, a new pattern emerges in the documentation. The Savannah Public Records Office contains 3 separate reports filed by neighboring properties regarding an unusual situation at the Whitmore estate. The reports, filed by different neighbors over a span of 6 months, all reference the same observation. Despite Eliza Whitmore's known infertility following the birth of her twins, the household appeared to have a new infant approximately every 18 months. These reports were apparently dismissed by local authorities. A notation on the 3rd report, in different handwriting, states simply, "Matter addressed with Mr. Whitmore." No further investigation required. Church baptismal records from 1851 through 1859 show 5 more Whitmore children being christened: James, William, Margaret, Henry, and Elizabeth. In each case, Mary Ann is noted as being present at the ceremony as the children's nurse. It was not until the discovery of Dr. Blackwood's complete journals in 1963 that a horrifying possibility came to light. Interspersed with his regular medical notes were coded entries, apparently written in a simple substitution cipher that the doctor's great-grandson was able to decode. These encrypted notes suggest a much darker reality. That following Eliza Whitmore's infertility, Mary Ann continued to bear children who were then claimed by the Whitmores as their own. The coded entries include observations like, "Child bears strong resemblance to mother, not to supposed parents." Whitmore insists no questions to be raised. And later, 3rd infant now claimed by Whitmores shows same distinctive birthmark on shoulder as mother. Ethical considerations overwhelmed by threats to my practice and family. If these decoded entries are accurate, they suggest that some or all of the 5 Whitmore children born after 1850 were actually Mary Ann's biological children, taken from her and raised as members of the Whitmore family, with Mary Ann herself forced to serve as their nurse. The final chapter of this disturbing case comes from court records dated September 1859. Thomas Whitmore was found dead in his study, apparently from a self-inflicted gunshot wound. The investigation notes include testimony from house staff that Whitmore had been increasingly agitated in the weeks prior, following the receipt of an anonymous letter whose contents were never disclosed. In the chaos following his death, Mary Ann disappeared from the property. The official record lists her as escaped, and advertisements were placed in local newspapers offering a reward for her return. But there is no evidence she was ever recaptured. The fate of the younger Whitmore children remains documented through conventional historical records. Under Eliza Whitmore's guardianship, they continued to be raised as white members of Savannah society. The older children eventually married into other prominent families. The youngest, Elizabeth, born in 1858, attended a finishing school in Virginia, according to records from 1874. What became of Mary Ann Dupree? The historical record falls silent. No documentation of her life after leaving the Whitmore estate has ever been definitively identified. A tantalizing possibility emerges in Canadian census records from 1871, which list a Mary D., age 52, occupation nurse, living in a small community near Toronto that was known to have connections to the Underground Railroad. But whether this is the same woman remains impossible to verify. The case of Mary Ann Dupree and the Whitmore estate represents one of the most psychologically disturbing documented instances of the horrors of the American slavery system. Beyond the physical brutality inherent in the institution, it reveals a form of psychological torture that defies comprehension. To bear children who are taken away, then to be forced to nurture and raise those very children while they grow up in privilege, never knowing their true parentage, while you, their mother, remain enslaved. The story might have remained buried in fragmentary historical records had it not been for the work of Dr. Elizabeth Jenkins, a historian at Howard University, who in 1965 began methodically cross-referencing slave schedules, medical records, parish registries, and personal documents to piece together the narrative. Her research, published in 1968 as The Forgotten Mothers, Hidden Lineages in Antebellum Savannah, sparked considerable controversy, but was ultimately supported by the documentary evidence she had meticulously assembled. It was Dr. Jenkins who discovered the final piece of this tragic puzzle. In the probate records following Eliza Whitmore's death in 1882, an item appears in the inventory of personal effects. One small, leather-bound book, contents indecipherable. This book, eventually acquired by the Georgia Historical Society, contained entries written in a private cipher. When finally decoded in 1967, it was revealed to be Eliza Whitmore's private confession, written in her final years. In it, she acknowledges the scheme conceived by her husband after her difficult delivery of the twins, to use Mary Ann as a surrogate mother, claiming the children as Whitmore offspring to preserve the family lineage and inheritance. The diary suggests that initially Eliza was reluctant, but eventually became a willing participant in the deception. The most chilling entry, dated just weeks before her death, reads, "I wonder if they will ever know. Margaret has her mother's eyes, William her gentle nature. If they knew the truth, that their beloved nurse was in fact their mother, and I merely the woman who claimed them, would they hate me as I have come to hate myself?" The diary provides no information about what might have been in the anonymous letter that preceded Thomas Whitmore's suicide. Nor does it reveal whether Mary Ann ever attempted to tell the children the truth, or if they lived their entire lives never knowing their actual parentage. The property that once housed the Whitmore estate was divided and developed in the early 20th century. Today, an upscale residential neighborhood stands where Mary Ann once walked with children who were hers by blood but never by law or social recognition. No historical marker acknowledges what transpired there. The story survives only in academic papers, archived records, and now in this narration. Perhaps most disturbing of all is the question that can never be answered. How many similar cases existed that left no documentary evidence behind? How many families in America today carry genetic lineages that contradict their historical family narratives? How many Mary Anns disappeared from history entirely, their stories and their children lost to a system designed to erase both their humanity and their maternal bonds? The case of Mary Ann Dupree and the children she raised, including those who were biologically hers but socially denied to her, stands as a stark reminder of slavery's profound psychological violence, the manipulation of motherhood as a form of control, and the complex, often hidden bloodlines that form part of America's historical legacy. As for the Whitmore descendants, genealogical records show they continued to prosper well into the 20th century, unaware of or unwilling to acknowledge the true circumstances of their ancestry. The last direct descendant died without children in 1958, perhaps bringing final closure to a family line built on one of the most disturbing documented cases of psychological cruelty in American history. And somewhere, perhaps, Mary Ann's true bloodline continued through her first children, those taken from her before the Whitmore's scheme began. Children who may never have known who their mother was, or the siblings they had in the grand houses of Savannah society. In the silence of archived records and faded journals, their shared blood whispers a truth that society worked desperately to conceal. That whisper echoes still, for those willing to listen. In 1969, during renovation work on one of Savannah's historic cemeteries, workers discovered something unusual beneath a crumbling stone marker. The marker itself bore only initials, MD, and a date, November 1859. This date, just 2 months after Thomas Whitmore's suicide and Mary Ann's disappearance from the estate, raised immediate questions among historians familiar with Dr. Jenkins' recently published research. Beneath the marker was a small metal box, severely corroded but still intact. Inside, preserved in oilskin wrapping, lay a collection of items that would provide the final haunting pieces to Mary Ann Dupree's story: a hand-stitched baby's cap, 11 carefully preserved locks of hair, each tied with different colored thread, and a thin journal, its pages filled with cramped, careful handwriting. The journal had been written in a phonetic approximation of English by someone who had taught themselves to write in secret. Linguistic experts from Emory University determined it had been written by a person who had likely been forbidden formal education, common for enslaved people in the antebellum South. The journal's contents, painstakingly transcribed over several months, revealed Mary Ann's own account of her years at the Whitmore estate. "First child taken before she know my face," one entry reads. "They say she go to Jenkins' place. I mark her with small cut on foot, so if God ever let me find her, I know her even grown." Later entries confirm the suspicions raised by Dr. Blackwood's coded medical notes. "Master say I carry child for mistress now. Say if I tell anyone, they sell all my children to Cuba where I never find them. Child born is boy. They name him James, but I whisper his true name when no one listen." The journal documents Mary Ann's secret ritual, giving each of her children their own private name, known only to her, and cutting a lock of their hair to preserve. "They take my children, but cannot take what only I know. Each has 2 names, one for world that steal them, one that bind them to me forever." Perhaps most disturbing are the entries describing Mary Ann's daily reality of caring for children who were biologically hers, but whom she was forbidden to claim. "William sick today with fever. I hold him and sing soft so no one hear words my mother sang to me. He look at me with his father's eyes, but my own mouth. Wonder if he feel the truth in his blood when I hold him." The final entries in the journal take a darker turn. They suggest Mary Ann had begun to notice Thomas Whitmore's growing unease, his tendency to drink heavily and stare at the younger children with what she described as fear in his eyes, like they becoming ghosts to him. She describes overhearing arguments between Thomas and Eliza about the risk of continuing, though the specific nature of this risk is not elaborated. The last entry, dated just 1 day before Thomas Whitmore's suicide, reads, "Master received letter today. His face turn white as cotton. He look at me like seeing spirit. Letter fall when he leave room. It say only, the children's features betray their true mother." Savannah society deserves to know the Whitmore line is tainted with slave blood. This final journal entry suggests the anonymous letter that preceded Thomas Whitmore's suicide may have been a blackmail attempt from someone who had recognized the physical resemblance between Mary Ann and the younger Whitmore children. The threat of such a revelation, that prominent white children in Savannah society were actually the biological children of an enslaved woman, would have been catastrophic to the family's social standing and inheritance claims in antebellum Georgia. But the journal provides no information about what happened after Thomas Whitmore's death, or how Mary Ann escaped the estate. For that, researchers turned to another source, the private papers of Reverend John Markham, a northern abolitionist known to have connections to the Underground Railroad in coastal Georgia. Markham's coded records, stored in the archives of the American Anti-Slavery Society and deciphered in 1972, contain a brief reference that may provide the answer. Received woman and infant from S. Plantation following master's death. Woman reports 7 other children left behind. Impossible to retrieve all without detection. Heartbreak beyond words, proceeding to safe house in Charleston with woman and infant only. If this entry does indeed refer to Mary Ann, it suggests she escaped with only her youngest child, presumably Elizabeth, born in 1858 and barely a year old at the time of Thomas Whitmore's suicide. The other children, being older and fully integrated into the Whitmore family's social identity, would have been impossible to take without immediately raising alarms. This interpretation is supported by one final piece of evidence discovered in 1975, a marriage certificate from Ontario, Canada, dated 1862. The certificate records the marriage of Mary Dupree, widow, age 43, to a John Freeman, a free black man who had escaped slavery in Virginia 2 decades earlier. The certificate lists Mary as having one dependent, Elizabeth Dupree, age 3. Canadian census records from 1871 and 1881 show this family living in a small farming community outside Toronto. The household includes Mary, John, Elizabeth, listed as their daughter, and by 1881, Elizabeth's husband and 2 young children. What became of the children Mary Ann left behind? The historical record provides a coldly factual account. Eliza Whitmore maintained the family's social position, raising the children as her own. Parish records show she became increasingly religious after her husband's death, requiring the household to attend church services 3 times weekly. The older Whitmore children eventually married into other prominent Southern families, their descendants scattered across Georgia and the Carolinas. In a cruel twist of historical irony, military service records from the Civil War show that Robert and Richard Whitmore, Mary Ann's nurslings but not her biological children, both fought for the Confederacy. James and William Whitmore, believed to actually be Mary Ann's biological sons but raised as white Whitmore heirs, were too young to fight, but later became successful businessmen in post-war Savannah, never knowing their true parentage. A photograph discovered in the Savannah Historical Society archives from 1870 shows Eliza Whitmore surrounded by her younger children, children who, if the documentary evidence is correct, were biologically Mary Ann's. They are dressed in the height of fashion, their features showing subtle but discernible similarities to the enslaved woman who had been their nurse and unacknowledged mother. Did any of them ever suspect the truth? Did Eliza, in her later years and troubled conscience, ever reveal the secret to them? The historical record provides no definitive answer. Eliza's cipher-written confession mentions only her own guilt, not any revelation to the children themselves. One tantalizing clue emerges in the personal correspondence of Margaret Whitmore Blakely, believed to be Mary Ann's biological daughter, but raised as a Whitmore. In a letter to her brother William, dated 1884, shortly after Eliza's death, she writes, "I have been troubled by strange dreams since Mother's passing. Dreams of another woman with my face, calling me by a different name. William, do you remember our nurse from childhood? There was something in her eyes when she looked at me that I never understood until now." The letter continues, "I found a small box among Mother's things, containing locks of hair tied with colored thread. My name was on one package, yours on another. But the handwriting was not Mother's. I have burned the box and its contents. Some questions are better left unanswered, for what good can come of answers that arrive too late to change a life already lived?" This letter suggests at least some of the children may have had suspicions or unconscious connections to their true mother, even if they never fully acknowledged or understood them. As for Mary Ann herself, Canadian records indicate she lived until 1891, dying at approximately 72 years of age. Her death certificate lists the cause as pneumonia following influenza. Her daughter Elizabeth lived until 1924, having raised 3 children of her own. Children who, unlike their grandmother, were born into freedom and knew their mother's embrace from birth to adulthood. The most haunting aspect of the Mary Ann Dupree case is what it represents beyond the individual tragedy. Historians and genealogists now recognize that such genetic passing may have been far more common than previously acknowledged. DNA studies conducted in the early 2000s on descendants of prominent Southern families have revealed African genetic markers in numerous family lines previously believed to be exclusively European in ancestry. Rachel Thompson, geneticist and historical researcher at Emory University, published a groundbreaking study in 2006 examining this phenomenon. What the Dupree case illustrates, she writes, is that American racial categories were always more porous than the rigid system acknowledged. The blood of the enslaved and the enslavers mingled, often through brutal exploitation, creating family trees whose true structure was deliberately obscured. Her research suggests that as many as 12% of white Southern families may have unknown African ancestry, often resulting from situations similar to the Whitmore case. Enslaved women bearing children who were then absorbed into white families, their maternal lineage deliberately erased from family narratives. The psychological implications are profound, notes Dr. Thompson. Consider the descendants of the Whitmore children today. How many of them identify as exclusively white, unaware that their direct maternal ancestor was an enslaved black woman? How would this knowledge transform their understanding of their own identity and America's racial history? The cemetery where Mary Ann's marker and metal box were discovered has since been preserved as a historical site. The simple stone with the initials MD has been maintained, though how it came to be there remains a mystery. No records exist of who arranged for Mary Ann's memorial, especially since her actual remains appear to have been buried in Canada. Some researchers speculate the marker may have been placed secretly by one of the Whitmore children who discovered the truth, or perhaps by someone in Savannah's free black community who knew Mary Ann's story and wished to commemorate her children left behind. The metal box, with its locks of hair and journal, may have been buried there by Mary Ann herself before her escape, a final act of remembrance for the children she could not take with her. Today, the legacy of Mary Ann Dupree extends beyond historical curiosity. It forces a confrontation with the complex psychological violence of slavery, a system that not only exploited human bodies for labor, but manipulated and severed the most fundamental of human bonds, that between mother and child. Mary Ann's story also challenges simplistic racial categories that have shaped American society. Her children, raised as white but born of a black mother, embodied the artificial nature of racial distinctions. Their descendants today may identify with a racial category that does not reflect their complete ancestry, unaware of the woman whose blood flows in their veins. In 1998, a remarkable epilogue to this story emerged. Elizabeth Caldwell, an elderly woman from Toronto, contacted the Georgia Historical Society with an extraordinary claim. As the great-granddaughter of Mary and Elizabeth Dupree, she possessed a family heirloom passed down through generations, a handwritten list of 11 names. My grandmother Elizabeth told my mother these were her true brothers and sisters, Caldwell stated in a recorded interview, names given to them in secret by their mother, different from the names they were called by others. My grandmother made her promise to remember them, and my mother made me promise the same. The names on the list: Adeline, Thomas, Solomon, Grace, Isaiah, Hope, Faith, Patience, Samuel, Ruth, and Joy represent the private names Mary Ann gave her children, names recorded nowhere in the official historical record, names that were whispered to children in moments of private connection between a mother and the children she was forbidden to claim as her own. Genetic testing offered to descendants of both the Whitmore family line and Elizabeth Dupree's Canadian descendants has provided scientific confirmation of their shared ancestry, though many declined to participate in the study. Those who did discover their connection to Mary Ann have responded in various ways, some embracing this new understanding of their heritage, others struggling to reconcile it with their long-held family narratives. One descendant of William Whitmore, upon learning of his true maternal ancestry, established a scholarship fund at Howard University in Mary Ann Dupree's name. "I cannot change the past," he stated at the scholarship's inauguration in 2004, "but I can acknowledge the truth of it and ensure that the strength and resilience of my actual great-great-grandmother is remembered and honored." The case of Mary Ann Dupree and her 11 children represents one of the most extensively documented instances of maternal separation and identity manipulation from the American slavery period. It survives today as a powerful reminder of how institutions of oppression work not only through physical violence, but through the manipulation and severing of fundamental human bonds, and how the consequences of such severing echo through generations, whether acknowledged or not. In the words of Dr. Elizabeth Jenkins, whose research first brought this case to light, Mary Ann Dupree's story forces us to confront not just the physical brutality of slavery, but its profound psychological violence, a violence that reached into the most intimate human relationship, that between mother and child, and twisted it into a tool of control. When we speak of healing historical trauma, we must acknowledge wounds as deep as these, passed down through blood and bone to descendants who may not even know why they carry them. The locks of hair preserved in Mary Ann's buried box are now kept in climate-controlled storage at the Smithsonian's National Museum of African American History and Culture in Washington, D.C. Her journal has been published in both its original form and with modern English translation, ensuring her voice, once silenced by a system that denied her literacy, autonomy, and maternal rights, can finally be heard. And perhaps, in some sense, the 11 names she gave her children in secret have achieved a form of immortality. Though the children themselves lived and died never knowing those names, the names themselves survive, a testament to a mother's love that persisted against a system designed to sever it, and to the enduring power of human connection to transcend even the most determined efforts to destroy it. In Mary Ann's own words, from the final page of her journal, "They take my children, but cannot take what only I know. Each has 2 names. One for world that steal them, one that bind them to me forever, forever indeed."